So we're going to look at the biological basis of language. What we mean by the biological basis of language is the fact that language is inside our genes. So children are born with an ability to speak language, and this makes a difference between us humans and animals. If you teach animals for ages, if you teach them for 2 or 3 years, they will not be able to speak language. However, we humans, since we are born with an ability to speak language, and since language is inside our biology, we have the ability to learn the language and to speak it. So today's lecture is about the biological basis of language. The contents: first, we are going to look at Lenneberg's criteria for determining whether a communication system is based in the biology of species or not. In other words, how could we determine whether language is inside our genes, is inside our biology or not? Of course, there are criteria for determining whether language or whether the communication system, whether we are born with an ability to use the communication system or not. At what age exactly do people learn language? Do they learn it, or are they equipped with the ability to learn language after birth or before birth? Of course, as I argued before in this lecture, that language, we are born with an ability to learn language. Every human is born with an ability to learn language. The second part of the lecture is how language is based in the biology of humans. How did we determine that language is based in our biology, that we are born with an ability to acquire language? Okay, let's start with the first part of the lecture, which is Lenneberg's criteria for determining whether a communication system is based in the biology of a species or not. So this is general. These criteria are general for both humans and animals. So of course, as you know, animals have their own communication systems. For example, monkeys shout, and their shouts are a communication system. For example, lions have roars, which are a communication system. Ants and bees have dances, which are communication system. If you notice an ant, you will find that while it crawls, while it is moving, it doesn't move in one straight path. It moves, then makes a circle or a round, then moves, etc. So every species has its own way of communication. So these criteria, these 4 criteria which we are going to look at, are for both humans and animals and insects. It's about communication system. So the criteria is the criteria which we are going to look at. Research whether the species which use this communication system have been born with these communication systems or not. So these criteria which we are going to look at are: first, the communication system has to be species specific. What we mean by this is it is only used by the same kind of species. For example, to see whether language is inside our biology, is inside our genes or not, we can see whether it is species specific. In other words, do animals speak? Of course, animals do not speak. No matter how much you teach them, they will not be able to communicate using language. Parrots, for example, parrots, and if you don't know the meaning of parrots, we call it bulbaga in Arabic. Parrots, some parrots are smart enough to speak, but they are not able to communicate with humans. They might repeat some words, 2 words or maximum 3 words, but again, this is not a form of communication, because what we mean by communication is conversation. You cannot have a dialogue with a parrot. You You can listen to the parrot speaking two or three to three words, but not verbal communication. So the first criteria for determining whether the species are born with the communication system or not is that it is species specific. For example, lions, they use roars to communicate with each other. We as humans, we cannot understand lions' roar. We don't know what do they mean by the roar itself. Are they angry? Are they hungry? Do they just express their need to gather? We cannot determine by just listening to the roar of the lion. Okay, so we humans, when we speak, animals do not know what we are saying. They cannot determine the meaning of the communication system which we use as humans, which is language. So the first criteria is that communication system has to be species specific, which means only the same kind of species use this communication system. The second thing is that the communication system has to be universal to all members of the species. So all lions, if you brought a lion from Africa and a lion from India, they'll be able to use the same kind of communication system. Okay, this is what we mean by the universality of the communication system. So these are two indications that the species are born with this communication system. The first is that it is species specific. It is only used by this kind of species, for example lions, for example humans. The second thing is that the communication system has to be universal to all members of the species. The third thing is certain aspects of the behavior and cognitive function for the system emerge only during infancy. So this communication system emerges, develops only during infancy. You cannot, for example, teach an adult lion to use the communication system of lions. It is too late. It is the communication system starts to emerge during infancy only. The third criteria, or the third criterion, which can determine whether the species, whether the species are born with the communication system or not, is the adaptation of the behavior of the growing individual to the behavior of other individuals around him. What we mean by this is the environment. Of course, the individual of the species develops as it is exposed to the communication system. It develops and it acquires the communication system. The environment has its own effect on acquiring the communication system, whether it is by humans, by insects, by animals. Okay. Now let us see if Lenneberg's criteria apply for the human language or not. So in the previous criteria, the four previous criteria which we have just discussed are general. They are not specific to humans. Now let's look at these four criteria in shade of the communication system used by humans, which is language. Is language inside our biology? Are we born with an ability to speak language or not? This is the question we are trying to answer in today's lecture. So as I said earlier, the first criterion is that the communication system has to be species specific. And of course, this is without any doubt, animals cannot talk. Of course, if you teach animals, they cannot talk, they cannot acquire language. If you brought a cat and tried to teach it English, for example, it will never learn English because it is not born with an ability to acquire English. The same applies for horses, for example. If you brought a horse and tried to teach the horse how to speak our language, the horse will not be able to speak Arabic because the horse is not equipped with our communication system, which is language. So language is species specific. It is only specific to humans. If you brought animals, if you brought insects, and teach them to use our communication system, they will not be able to acquire it. Animals cannot talk, and they cannot be taught a human communication system. You cannot teach a dog to speak Arabic, you cannot teach a dog to speak English, etc. The second criteria is the universality of language. Of course, this might be a bit difficult for you to grasp, because Arabic and English are different. Arabic has different characteristics to English. If you compare Arabic to, for example, Urdu, if you compare Arabic to Persian, if you compare Arabic to any other African language or Asian language, you will find that we use some different form of communication. We have a difference in language. However, what we mean by universality of language, we are not looking at the minor differences or the differences between languages. What we are looking for is something universal, which is shared by all languages of the world. One of the things shared by all languages of the world is that infants, the babies, are genetically prepared to acquire language. All babies are genetically prepared to acquire language. They acquire language within approximately the same schedule. So all people, regardless whether they are from China, from the United States of America, from France, they acquire language at the age of 2, for example. So they acquire it on the same schedule. This is what we mean by universality of language. Another thing is that all human languages have universal properties. For example, at this time we have already learned about phonology, morphology, and syntax. Of course, there is no language which does not have phonology. There is no human language which does not have morphology. There is no human language which does not have syntax. This is something universal. This is something which applies to all languages. All languages are similar in having phonology. All languages are similar in having morphology and syntax as well. The third criterion of which was claimed by Lenneberg is that there is an age restriction for acquiring the first language, and of course this applies to humans. I'm not sure whether or not you have already taken the critical period. If not, the critical period is an age restriction for acquiring language. If you brought a baby, if you have taken a baby who's 1 day old, he has just been born. If you have taken him and put him inside or put him in a desert, and you just gave him food and water without any form of linguistic communication until the age of puberty, this child will not be able to learn any language, including the first language, after the age of puberty, which is, in Arabic we call it bulugh. After the age of puberty, humans are not able to learn language or to acquire language efficiently. So, as I said earlier, this child who has been raised in the desert will not be able to acquire language after the age of puberty. So the critical period is can be defined that linguistic competence of the first language can only be achieved if the language is learned before puberty. Okay. The fourth criterion is language development is triggered by the environment. For example, children will not acquire language if it is not accessible in their environment. So if children are not exposed to language in their early life, they will not be able to acquire language efficiently. If you brought a child and let him live with, for example, someone who doesn't speak to him at all, he will not be able to learn language. The same is if there is nobody to interact with the child will not be able to speak the language. This is what we mean by that, by the fact that language development is triggered by the environment. Okay? So this is the end of today's lecture, and as promised before, at the end of the lecture we are going to have an exercise. The exercise for today's lecture is language is based in the biology of humans because. So you have to choose one of these 4 items. First, language is species specific. There are universal aspects of language. Or C, there is an age restriction for acquiring the first language. All 4, all of the previous items are correct. I will give you some time to think of the best answer for this question. Is it A, are we born with the language is species specific? Is it because we have it in our biology? Or because there are universal aspects of language, then we can say that language is inside our biology? Or is it because there's an age restriction for acquiring the first language, we say that language is inside our biology? Or is it because all of these 3 we can tell that we are born with an ability to acquire language? The answer is D, because as we have seen in the lecture, first, language is species specific, language is species specific, language is universal, and there is an age restriction for acquiring the first language. And we can see here these 3 items are present in the exercise, and this what makes the 4th one is true. All of the previous items are correct. Thanks for listening to the lecture, and I hope you have enjoyed it, and thanks very much.